Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming, both here physically at the AIIA as well as online, to join our Melbourne Climate Talk. It is a series of events that the German Embassy is organizing to talk about climate-related issues. This Climate Talk here in Melbourne has been organized together with the Australian Institute for International Affairs, as well as the German Chamber of Industry and Commerce. And I'm very happy that you are all here today to talk about a very important issue, soft plastics recycling in Australia and the potential for cooperation with Germany. Soft plastics contribute largely to climate change and pollution. And so it's time that we talk about this important issue. And I'm super happy that we have assembled a very diverse panel to talk about this and accept your questions as well. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Grzeski to deliver her welcome remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Ladies and gentlemen, before I begin, I acknowledge the Woiwurrung and the Woiwurrung people as traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on today, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Melbourne Climate Talk at the Australian Institute of International Affairs, where we will explore a pressing environmental challenge of our time, the future of soft plastic recycling in Australia and the potential for cooperation with Germany. As two highly developed economies with ambitious climate goals, Germany and Australia must address the environmental and climate impacts of plastic consumption. The numbers are staggering. In 2020, Australia's plastic consumption resulted in over 3.8 million tons of plastic waste. And without intervention, plastic consumption and related emissions are projected to more than double by 2050. And meanwhile, in Germany, over 6.6 million tons of plastic waste were generated in 2021. And while Germany has made significant progress in recycling infrastructure, there are challenges that remain, and it's improving the material recovery rates and reducing dependency on waste incineration, which is at the moment 64% of the treatment of the waste. So plastic production and disposal contribute significantly to climate change, resource depletion, and environmental pollution. And therefore, in my view, the need for improved recycling schemes and cross-national cooperation is clear. That's the reason why we gather here today, and we initiated that meeting. I think that both countries can learn from another, and that Germany, with its long-standing experiences in circular economy policies, can serve as a partner for developing innovative recycling solutions here in Australia. Germany has a long tradition of recycling, beginning with the Grüner Punkt, Green Dot, that was a scheme in 1991. And I may add, when I started a long time ago my diplomatic career, my first posting was in the Netherlands, and I was the first ever counselor on transport and environment. And it was then that we explained also to the Dutch, well, how this could happen, and this green dot, and it was unclear how it worked and if people would accept. And it took a long time until it was implemented. But well, today we came a long way. So for me, it's good that I can link to that part of my career. So today's plastic waste management is guided by extended producer responsibility, holding manufacturers financially responsible for the collection, sorting, and recycling of packaging waste. And that means ensuring that producers contribute to the costs of waste management. But I have to add, not only the producers, but also we as consumers, because the producer will hand over these costs also to the consumer. Luckily, Germany is also known for its strong culture of waste separation, with households and businesses systematically and almost religiously sorting waste into 5 different bins. 5 bins in all colors before the houses in Germany. Maybe you have seen that already on TV. Additionally, Germany has a well-functioning deposit return scheme and fund system, which ensures high collection rates for beverage containers and helps reduce plastic in the first phase. And what we hope by this meeting here, that by sharing best practices, investing in research and fostering industry partnerships, Germany and Australia can accelerate the development of a green and circular economy for plastics that would benefit both countries. I'm not the expert, so I stop here with it. And I would like to thank our distinguished panelists for their participation today. They will be much more competent to explain you all of this. So I just named them. Barry Cosier is CEO for Soft Plastic Stewardship in Australia. It's Lorna Mathieson, Director of Circular Economy Programs at DEECA. Chris Gusenzow, I hope I pronounced it right. Yeah, sort of. General Manager Western Australia from REMONDIS. Kirsty Bishop-Fox from Zero Waste Victoria. And our moderator, Lisa McLeod from Blue Environment. Special thanks to the Australia Institute for International Affairs, the German Australian Chamber of Industry and Commerce, and Think Business Events for making this event possible. I look forward for an engaging and productive discussion on how we can turn the tide on plastic waste and climate change through international cooperation. Thank you very much.
And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our moderator tonight, Lisa McLeod from Blue Environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian, and thank you very much, Ambassador, for your words. And I was very pleased to hear there was a little bit of data in there as well. Always like to hear a bit of data coming across. Now, is my mic working? Can people hear me? Great. Apologies, slightly croaky voice because the weather changes always seem to get me. So I'm from Blue Environment. We are a specialist consultancy in waste, resource recovery and circular economy. I've only been in this space in the deep way for a couple of years, but I've had a long career working mostly in government in environmental regulation. My fellow panellists, on the other hand, have had very long and extensive careers and have got an enormous amount of knowledge between them. So we're fortunate to have such an incredible group of panellists here and they do represent across really the whole spectrum. We have policy, we have research, we have industry and community. So I'm going to delve into the current state of soft plastic recycling in Australia, look at some of the innovative solutions and global best practices and discuss how we can move forward. First of all, we're going to hear from our panellists and we've got sort of a number of questions we'd like to work through, and then we'll move to questions from the floor. So hopefully everyone's been thinking about things they want to ask. So you've already been introduced, so I might not redo the introductions. I might just get you to come up. Martin Geisdorfer from Monash, you can come up and join us. Lorna Mathieson from DEECA in Victorian State Government. Barry, we have on screen. Thank you very much to Barry. Just the reason Barry couldn't join us in person is because he's on the Gold Coast, and for anyone that's been watching the news, he's had a few other issues to hand in the last couple of weeks or so. Chris from WA, REMONDIS, thank you very much. As someone knows, German global company, and Kirsty from Zero Waste Victoria. Okay. So I might get each of you just to tell us a little bit about you and your work and your perspectives on soft plastic recycling. And we've got a couple of microphones up here, I think. We've got
I can also pass.
one, and one is coming. Martin, why don't you kick off?
So my name is Martin Geisdorfer. I'm Associate Professor at the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, where I lead the Circular Economy Labs. I'm from my background, a bit of a hybrid. So I work obviously in academia and policy and management research on the circular economy, so especially how we can scale circular models. Because we see there's a lot of incrementalism going on, how can we overcome this? And it's obviously in Australia, we just started this journey, but actually in Europe, it's also a problem by now. So I also have an industry background, so I worked at a consultancy called McKinsey before on very much the same topics now for quite a long time before the circular economy was cool, if you want. and I think soft plastics are particularly fascinating because they are like really one of the toughest challenges in this transition. And there's a lot of technological change going on, a lot of models that are invented, but it's one of these things where it's actually like the important thing is how you can avoid it in the first place if possible. So quite excited about this discussion today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lorna Mathieson, Director Circular Economy Programs in DEECA, which is a mouthful, so we'll just keep it to DEECA. It's basically the Environment and Energy and Climate Action Department of the Victorian Government. I've had a very long career in the public service. Now that I think about it, I'm feeling tired. But I've been in the waste and recycling space in and out really since 2010, I think, maybe before that. No, 2010 sounds, no, 25, a long time. And I was working in energy, some of you might remember when we had the recycling crisis in Victoria in 2019, and I was unceremoniously grabbed from my energy position and taken down to lead the recycling response. At that time, we'd started developing the circular economy policy, and one of the things that I was really interested in Victoria in particular was a system response. I didn't want to just come in and fix the problem that was there. I didn't want to see us just do the same thing that we've always done. So we've set up a significant program of reform in Victoria, and how we deal with soft plastics is obviously critically important if we think about it from a circular economy perspective. It's not just dealing with the waste, it's recycling, but it's not recycling by the definition that we've previously used as recycling. It is making it into something the same or something better. So from a SINS, I'm here tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing the diverse views of the panel and some of the questions from the floor.
Thanks, Lorna.
Got my own, hopefully, so it works.
Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone. As suggested, my name's Chris Gusenzow from REMONDIS in Western Australia. I'm an accountant by trade, so don't hold that against me at all. But I have been in the recycling recovery game for just shy of 20 years, 13 years of that with REMONDIS. I suggested a German-based family-owned business. Don't let that fool you, like most good German companies. I think they're just shy of 200,000 employees. So quite well versed in everything. And my favourite fun fact for REMONDIS is we're the largest supplier of natural sausage casings in the world. So when you think about recovery, every aspect we get into. So hopefully a little bit of diversification as we come in and we talk about, there should be enough to cover off as we work through.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, I'm Kirsty Bishop-Fox. I'm a co-founder of Zero Waste Victoria. We're a not-for-profit community-based organisation, largely volunteer-run. I'm seeing some familiar faces, some of our volunteers as well, and what an amazing turnout we've got for this topic tonight, such an important one. I'm also a sustainability educator in my own space, and I was asked before what that means, which is a really good question. I'm not always asked what that means, and I like that I was, because people who aren't in the sustainability space see that as like the answer. But what I do is actually really quite broad in the sense that I do a lot of work in schools, but I also do a lot of work with adults as well too. So I can have grade 2s one day and I'll be at a corporate client talking about waste the next. And it could be waste, it could be food waste, plastic waste, it could be conserving energy. It's sustainably quite broad. Often I love doing programs with leaders and leadership. And it's really interesting because when I work with schools, it's funny, we have all the problems and there's the kids, they have all the answers. So maybe we should have had more schools here today, maybe next time. I won't keep talking, there's a lot I could say, but it's education, it's quite broad. I didn't mean to fall in this space, but my background is I'm an environmentalist, and so it was just a natural progression.
Thanks, Kirsty. And Barry, can you introduce yourself?
Thanks for the opportunity today, and apologies I'm not there in person. There's a little bit going on up north, as you would have heard. Yeah, my background, like Chris, I started work as an accountant, so again, don't hold that against me. And then I've spent probably about the better part of 30 years working in various food and grocery brands, also in the waste and recycling sector. So similar to Lorna, I spent a lot of time around the global recycling crisis with renegotiating contracts. And so through that career, I guess I've spent a lot of time dealing with packaging designers, packaging suppliers, upstream, and then downstream. I've worked a lot with councils who are left with the legacy of those products. And then in more recent years, worked with local, state and federal government for the Australian Food and Grocery Council. The AFGC led or started a program called the National Plastic Recycling Scheme, and that was targeting soft plastics. And the original intent of that kicked off in 2020 was to actually grow the Red Cycle scheme. So that was way before, it was 2 years before it actually collapsed. So our aim was to, go further with soft plastic recycling. I'm currently the co-CEO of a new entity called Soft Plastic Stewardship Australia. So it's a very new product stewardship entity tasked with, and I like what you said, Lorna, making it something the same or something better. So turning soft plastics into a valuable resource. Just a side note, on my emails that just popped up while this kicked off was an email from a gentleman by the name of Joachim Quoden, who is the CEO of EXPRA, which is a Global Product Stewardship Association, who's based in Cologne, who we've had a lot to do with in the development of the scheme. So the connection with Germany probably dates back about 5 years for us. So thank you.
Thanks, Barry, and thanks everyone else for the introductions. As you can tell, we have quite a diverse panel, so we will be able to cover quite a bit of ground, hopefully, this evening. But just to get us going, a little bit of sort of some background and a little bit of data. Promise, not much. My organisation, Blue Environment, is probably best known for data and data collection. The two directors in particular have spent quite a number of years now collecting Australia's national waste data, the plastics weight and flows data, and packaging data. So I'll just give a little bit. But I guess just in terms of context, plastics has been around since about the 1950s. And as everyone knows, it has obviously grown significantly over time, the use of plastics. And that's partly because they've been helpful. They've made things lighter. They've helped us keep our food longer. So there are certainly positives to plastics. They're not necessarily an evil thing. But of course, it's fair to say there's been increasing concerns, particularly in the last decade. There's been a number of studies around the impacts on plants and animals, and of course that includes humans. But in Australia, the conversation has been probably more focused around recycling rather than, or less so than carbon or climate impacts. So greenhouse emissions associated with production and use and disposal of plastics have been given less attention. Now, you would probably all know that most plastics are made from fossil fuel. So, of course, the main ingredient has significant carbon emissions. And then there's also carbon emissions associated with our use and then our recycling, and depending on the way we recycle the plastics or deal with the plastics, those emissions can change. So to give a little bit of an idea of the scale of soft plastics in Australia, and I think Ambassador gave us a national figure on plastics, which was around 3.8, and I think in 22-23, the amount of plastics in end-of-life sort of waste plastic generated in Australia was around 3 million tonnes. So that's a big number. But then if we look at packaging, because soft plastics is basically packaging, we're looking at a smaller number. We're looking at about 1.3 million tonnes. It's still a pretty big number though. But then we've got to break that down a bit further because we're talking about the soft part of packaging, not the rigid parts and not your water bottles and whatnot. So when we go look at our soft plastics, about 500,000 or 500,000 tonnes was generated in 22-23. And now for the not so good statistic on that, the recovery rate that was about 6%. And unfortunately, that gets a little bit worse because that was basically all business plastic. So your wraps around products when they get delivered. So what we call business to business, very, very small amount of consumer soft plastics recycled. And Barry is going to give us a little bit more insight into why that was the case in 22, 23. He's also already alluded to sort of the Red Cycle scheme, which of course collapsed, and then there's been significant work trying to work out the path forward from there. So Barry, Red Cycle's challenges obviously highlighted some critical issues in our recycling system. I'm wondering if you can share with us some lessons that we can learn from the experience and how organisations like yours ensure a more resilient approach to soft plastics in the future.
Thanks, Lisa. So someone's just messaged me and said my internet's not great, so just let me know if that's the case, if you need to backtrack at all. I'll give a bit of an intro to the second part of your question first, like who is Soft Plastic Stewardship Australia? Up over my shoulder, you see a new logo. So this entity is now about 6 months old. So we've brought together of the AFGC's National Plastics Recycling Scheme and the work of Coles, Woolies and Audi with the Soft Plastics Task Force. We've created a new independent not-for-profit entity, and it starts with what the ambassador was talking about. It's getting brands to pour money in where there's market failure. So the entity is kicking off. The funding is, and I got to say thanks to the companies who are supporters. We've got about 30 or 40 companies as supporters, and they're putting in the working capital to bankroll this initially. Having said that, this is one of the big issues that we've also learned from Red Cycle is even with all those big companies, we've still got about 85% free riders is our estimate. So all the big companies are in, the majority of them, and they only represent about 15% of the packaging put on the market. But when we really look back at Red Cycle, there's probably 4 things that we learned, and there's 4 elements of a really solid product stewardship scheme. And if you start with the end in mind, it's one of my favourite quotes from Stephen Covey. If you're going to make something, you've got to have a customer. So if we go back to Red Cycle, they were sending material through to really good recyclers. And that was going into road-based, timber substitutes and so on. But it's a really nascent market. So if we compare it to, I think Lorna made a comment, if you compare it to other materials, they've got really developed markets. Soft plastics at the moment, if you're going into these new areas, you've got to have quality standards. So they're all being developed at the moment. But because recycled content comes at a premium to virgin, we really need to have regulated recycled content so there's a level playing field. So that's sort of the first key learning. The second one is you need sufficient capacity to recycle it, and you need multiple recyclers. So Red Cycle faced the issue of a couple of their end market processes not having enough market demand, and then the third one had a fire. So you need to ensure against that and have contingency. So behind the scenes now, there is currently operating in Australia 2 to 3 times this infrastructure in place operating that will process 2 to 3 times what Red Cycle could collect annually. So Red Cycle only collected about 3% of the consumer soft plastics that went on the market, despite being in 2,000 stores. So we've already got that capacity, but they're working on the end market development. The next piece is the collection. And this is the devil's in the detail, and Lorna's working on this in the department. Red Cycle had an ultimate issue of collecting too much. We now have an issue of not being able to collect enough for the new infrastructure. So it's very quickly gone from a problematic material to a resource people want. And so collections are going to have to scale in time as the end markets scale. So what we'll probably need there is curbside standards so we can collect enough material to generate the investment confidence for the infrastructure that's coming. And the fourth point, and I'll wrap up on this, is you've got to make sure you've got sufficient funding. So to fund these to the scale you need to be able to expand it at the rate to achieve targets. Again, we've got 85% free riders. We've got a lot of companies pouring in millions of dollars. However, regulating the membership of the scheme will accelerate this no end. So those 4 points are really the key learnings out of recycle.
Thanks, Barry. And I think your comment about, virgin polymers cost less, it's something that is extraordinarily frustrating because, of course, they're not needing to cost in a whole lot of other externalities in the damage. So that was a great summary of a fair bit of the value chain there. Thank you for that, giving us a bit of a sense of, we're creating the plastic waste, but we have to obviously be able to collect it, and then we've got to be able to do something with it, and then someone's got to want that something at the other end. So I'm going to ask Lorna now, building on what we've heard from Barry, and I know that you're working quite closely with Barry and others. So what we've heard from Barry about the challenges and opportunities in soft plastics recycling, can you elaborate on what the Victorian government's strategic direction is and tell us about the current market and what that means for the future market?
Yeah, sure. So as Barry said, REDcycle, basically, they could collect it. They could collect as many soft plastics as there existed in Australia. But if you've got limited processing capability and capacity, then you're wandering into issues in the supply chain. So for me, it's always about looking at the supply chain and looking at the market. Where are the market failures along that supply chain? And then what's government's role in that supply chain? And much of that time, there is a significant role that government can play on its own, and we're currently doing that through the reform. We're introducing 4 services across Victoria. We're standardising those services. Every single council will have to deliver the same service to their community. Every single council bin contents will have to be the same, and that will be regulated. Bin lists and bin contents, those will be standardised, and they'll also be reviewed regularly. One of the things that we are trying to do through that is actually provide some signals to market to go, hey, there is a valuable commodity in this bin. If we can collect it at a time when you're ready, come and invest, because we can collect it for you, we can get it to your door, then it's up to you to do the recycling in it. That's a little bit around some of the reform. Those standards are going to make a huge difference, the regulation around those standards. And of course, that oversight of local government and the services that they provide to households is a really important bit. But we've got a missing piece of the jigsaw. We've still got to get into the commercial and industrial space and some of the construction and demolition space where we could do better around some of that recovery. But you've got to choose the easy things first. I say that I think we chose a hard thing first, but never mind. I might change my mind if I was back in time. But the market in Victoria is very, very different from the market in the rest of Australia. And that's partly because of our geographic profile. We don't have vast swathes of unoccupied land between towns as New South Wales, Queensland, Northern Territory, South Australia and Western Australia have. So we can be quite concentrated in what we're doing here, but it also means it's easier for us to get product into the next part of the supply chain. So transport isn't quite as bad. And, we talk about plastics and the numbers, you go 3 tons, like 3 tons is nothing, right? There's no price signal on 3 tons, 3 million tons, but it's still like 3 million tons in the context of the amount of waste isn't a lot. It's when you put it in the context, well, how many individual pieces of packaging is that it becomes a really terrifying number. So those kind of things in the market, pricing signals to consumers to do the right thing. You've got a recycling bin, you should use it. A container deposit scheme provides an incentive for people to return, packaging like PET. So it's really challenging, that conversation around soft plastics. And it's just something that's in our everyday lives that we've wish cycled. We've put them in bins because it's got a stamp, a triangle on it. It's still a fight in my household. If it's got a triangle on it, it goes in the recycling bin. And I clear the ones out that actually Number 7, number 7 is not going in that recycling bin. Thank you very much. So there's a lot of education that goes along with it. And so when we're thinking about how do we change a system or how do we change a sector, it's got to be the whole package. It's not just investment in infrastructure. It's not just producer responsibility. It's not just how we collect it. It's got to be along that entire value chain. And one of the really great parts, I think, now is the ability, and thanks Red Cycle, but it was pretty horrible what happened. It's that conversation that we can have with packaging companies to say, well, how do you make your packaging more recyclable? Can you use less of it? Like, can you just not have it in the first place? So we're actually, circular economy actually gives us license, I think, to have that conversation along the entire supply chain. We're not constrained by just what happens at the end. So I think that's changing in this market. We've got a much better dialogue with industry and what can you cope with? How can we help? Significant investment at the start of circular economy policy. All those things need to come together.
Thanks, Lorna. Now, can you tell us the number of pieces of plastic? Because
I'm giving you warning here.
I don't know either.
My attention to details is pretty awful, but I could have brought the data person. You've got the data person for environment.
And I am going to find out later because now I'm really curious.
Darren, do you know the individual pieces? No.
Thanks for that, Lorna. And there was a number of things in there that were really interesting and topical. Of course, you know, the interim report's just come out from the Productivity Commission, and one of the things that talks about is harmonisation and how critical that is to make these systems work, because things don't just stop at our borders, and plastics is a great example. Plastics is moving back and forth all over the place, and you know, it really is. This is one of the challenges when we do the survey. We have to figure out and make sure we're not double counting, and it's a challenging space.
I'd just say harmonisation is just, it's a mythical being. It can never happen, but standardisation we could do. Harmonisation is everybody does the same. Everybody. So Victoria's going to have a 4-bin system. New South Wales, you've got to have a 4-bin system. That would be harmonisation. Standardisation would be, we've made a decision on minimum standard contents in a bin or the colours of the bin lid. That could easily be done in different states. So we're not expecting, Northern Territory could not roll out a 4-bin system. They probably can't even roll out a 3-bin system. They might get away with a 2, but pretty challenging for them. But where they are able to implement it, it would be the same as every other state.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's good to clarify some of that language too. Thank you. Okay, so just moving, I guess, along a little bit, but still saying a bit in the same vein. We're going to move to Martin now. So, and Martin, of course, is from research institution, Monash University. And what we'd love to hear from you, Martin.
Not a circle, but a sharing economy.
Is just considering that interplay between innovation and policy, and some of the things sort of Lorna's touched on there in the policy space. What role do you think the research institutions like Monash can play in fostering the collaboration across industries and governments, and to address some of these challenges?
Thank you very much, and I think it's quite an interesting question, because I think research institutes can be quite important, what we call a transition broker, or a bridge between the different parties that we need to transform the system. And I really like this idea that it's not a waste management problem that we are facing, right? It's really a transformation that we are facing to what we call a circular economy. So really away from downcycling, simple forms of recycling. Is quite a comprehensive transformation that we're looking at. It's not something that any one sector could go along. So we had heard that consumers are important. We have heard that companies are important, policy important. And I think when you look at research institutes, there's a range of things that we can do to help that process along and to support it. The obvious one that people obviously think of first when they think of universities is skills and capabilities. So there's a huge skills gap when it comes to recycling, when it comes to plastic recycling, all across the world, but especially in Australia, of course. And that's obviously something that we can look into. We just got a unit on circular economy so that's for the Germans in the room that might not be particularly innovative, but we are getting it onto the teaching agenda. And I think that's most, like, probably the most important mandate that we have, that we really develop leaders in the field that can take this forward and can make this a reality. And of course, besides students, universities and research institutes are still very important in executive education, in doing workshops with industry upskilling. There's quite a lot of education that is going on. And we heard in the beginning that education is really critical in these sustainability issues. But with recycling, I think it's even more important because it's really a complex system, quite technical. But there's more that we can do. So we can also support industry. I've already heard about German industry that they are quite leading in the space. So there's actually a lot of models that work in Europe that could also work in the Australian context, but we really have to make them accessible to industry here, to explain how they work, to really see where they can get started, to get all this work that has been done really accessible for them, but also to do research into how it can be adapted into the Australian context, which is very different, where we have much more geographical distance, where we have often much less infrastructure in place, very different investment landscapes. There's a lot of things that we can learn, but also a lot of things that don't necessarily work immediately without really looking into, like, what are the problems they are facing, what are the challenges, what are the bottlenecks, and how we can address them. I think we also have a very important support role when it comes to policy. We heard already about the Productivity Commission, about there's also a new Australian and German circular economy strategy and framework coming out. It's really on top of the agenda for a lot of policymakers. And we as universities can, of course, get the data into that, can do benchmarking of different policies, what works, what doesn't work, what is the evidence, what works. So to really take out the guesswork in the process for policymakers. So it's quite a good role that we can play. And there's a lot of things happening. There was just a Circular Economy Institute Advisory Group, for example, that had a proposal. There was the Circular Economy Framework for Australia was published, and all of them is really based on a lot of the work when it comes to benchmarking what works around the world, and also work, for example, that's done by CSIRO in Canberra that we work quite closely with, where it's really about material flow analysis and really getting data-informed process in that. And then last but not least, there's, of course, when it comes to technology, when we look at plastic recycling, there's still a lot of technological innovation happening, especially when it comes to chemical recycling. And obviously, universities play a very important role in research institutes to work closely with industry and to develop these solutions and develop them in an efficient way. And also ideally then make them accessible. So often we also have technology that has to be scaled up. And that's obviously like industry that comes in, venture funding, but a lot of this is also done at university incubators. I just had a chat yesterday with somebody from Melbourne University, probably not advertised the competition, but they have just established a really good venture investment fund, and that's also a very important role that is often overlooked. So I think with this I stop here, but I think back to your question, I think there's a really important translation role, but also a really important role to get knowledge across, to connect different players, and to really support the process across the different sectors of society.
Thank you, Martin. And I will say it's worth having a look at the Monash Sustainable Development Institute. Did I get that right? Yes, website. There's some really fascinating stuff on there, and it's a great source of information. There you go, giving you a plug over Melbourne. Okay, so you talked a little bit about technology there, and we haven't talked too much about technology, but we do want to cover some of it. Chris, you're from a global German company, and you work in the probably closer into the technology space than some. But we're interested to understand a bit more about Germany from you. And I understand you've sort of been reaching into your networks because Germany's obviously got a well-established soft plastics management approach. And of course, that's supported by the extended producer responsibility, which is much stronger in Europe than it is here, although we are heading in the right direction, I think. So, Chris, from your perspective, what aspects of Germany's approach do you think can be adapted to Australia's context, and where do you think there's the key differences?
Yeah, sure. I think the ambassador probably could have sat up here and covered off on a bit of this as well, but I think I'll probably start with explaining the EPR with how it works on the soft plastics first in Germany to give it context, and then really from there understanding what works well and what could work better. So essentially, there's a tax, for want of a better word, on all packaging when it starts in Germany. So whether that's soft plastics, paper, cardboard, whatever it works out to be, there is a tax associated with that. How that works is similar from your 10-cent container deposit scheme, but it takes into account more detail. So it's not just a container is a container or a piece of plastic is a piece of plastic. It takes into account how recyclable is that piece of plastic or that container, and also what is the likelihood that that piece of plastic or container is going to become contaminated through the recovery process in order to be recycled afterwards. So it's a really, really important thought process that they've gone to with the tax, for want of a better word, into making sure that the outcome in some form or another is actually achieved. So I think that's an important piece when we take that into account. When that works from a scheme perspective, we heard that there's a lot of source separation that happens in Germany, and that's another really, really important piece. I think that the Red Cycle program that started, at least, is a really good piece because it is source separated as much as possible. The German scheme has a good source separation process. I'm looking at Darren, glass out. So glass out is a real critical piece when it comes to recovering other pieces of commodities. They have a paper cardboard process that comes out, which enables them to put more of other types of material in their commingled stream. So they call it more of a packaging containers scheme. So soft plastics does go through a commingled piece, which therefore, when they recover it, their ability to recycle that next level is probably hindered a little bit more than what we would see under necessarily a Red Cycle program or under our commercial waste, where we're picking up soft plastics from the likes of Coles and Woolworths retailers, and we're picking up really good quality material, source separated. So I think that's an important piece that we need to understand, is keeping the source separated as much as possible. The next piece is then when we recover it or we look at recovering it. So in Germany at the moment, I'd say there's three main areas that it goes into. So some of the material goes off, and there is a limited market to make, plastic furniture and things like that gets amalgamated together and they make it. So it's not a sustainable piece of being able to say, yes, let's just make chairs out of everything. We know that doesn't work. There is a small fraction, again, I think it's just under 50%, where depending on the size, the level of contamination, they can wash it, clean it, and they use it in low-grade pipes. So not high pressure, your grey water, stormwater type pipes. So there's a market enough, a sustainable market enough to take that. Unfortunately, like we heard, there's still a large amount of it that does go off to, I'm going to say energy recovery more than waste to energy. There is a slight difference. I'm not going to bore you with all that here, but there is a slight difference in it. Some of it is more as a fuel content. Some of it is more of a mass burn content. I guess the reason why that happens in a lot of aspects is there's some legislation gaps, I think, that we need to take into account, that if we legislate in a certain area, it might open doors or restrict other areas. So the reason why that happens in a lot of aspects is because they have a really big circular footprint that they push to make things circular. And the circularity of plastics, when it's commingled and when it's soft film, has to go down a chemical path, but to take it from a polymer back into a polymer is significantly more advanced than taking it from a polymer back into an oil, say. So some of those aspects we need to take into account when we legislate. We really need to think of what is the cost of the alternatives. I think we've seen that with the export bans in particular. We used to have really good quality plastics that we used to sell offshore. We're now recycling them onshore, which is great, but we're not recycling to the level that they were overseas. And the other problem is with that is that we haven't restricted the ability to bring in virgin material as well. So I think what we need to learn is that when we look at legislation in some of those aspects, we have to look at other ways that it might impact the decision and the thought process of consumers, recyclers. In the end, from a commercial point of view, from a recycler, if it was profitable for us, everyone would be doing it everywhere. So there's a reason why people aren't doing it to that extent. We have to understand what are those reasons why, and we have to work through. We've heard it before, and we're going to hear it a lot, the whole value chain of how it works. I think Germany's done it really, really well with some of those aspects. I think it needs to be tweaked a little bit more, but it sounds like Barry's on the right path there.
Thanks, Chris. And I think the source separation, that it's a great point. And I know there are different views. There are different views in the industry about what the best way to collect soft plastics are and whether it should be mixed and not mixed. I wonder whether we could handle 7 bins here. Personally, I'd love it because I'm very organised. And at home, everything's separated and then it all has to go together. But I'm thinking Lorna wouldn't like it at all. Okay, I won't go there then. All righty, Kirsty, you have been waiting very patiently over there, and we have been talking very much about downstream, if you like, once it's a waste and what can we do with that waste. But a really important part of the conversation, of course, is to go upstream, up the waste hierarchy, so to speak, and talk also about how do we avoid waste in the first place, how do we minimise it. And that's where Kirsty would really love you to go. Behaviour change and consumer engagement are important to reducing plastic, as are other things. But I'm interested to know from you what strategies or campaigns have been the most effective in driving change. You've obviously had a lot of experience in this education space. And what more can be done to encourage a shift towards reuse and reduce consumption?
Well, the good news is a lot more can be done. And I just want to start before I answer that question. I've been sitting here listening, as everyone has, to conversations about REDcycle. And this might sound very odd, but I found it almost refreshing. And the reason I say that is when REDcycle collapsed, I was actually asked for media interviews. Not many, but a couple. And it was all about REDcycle. The good Victorians have been collecting their plastic and now REDcycle. And I got very frustrated by that because, as we know, that the failing of REDcycle was actually not REDcycle's fault. There wasn't the systems in place to do that. So when you talk about, I guess, the mindset that we have out there, it's the media actually caught on that. And it's so interesting because REDcycle did amazingly well, but it was only 3%. And 3% is kind of huge, but it was only 3%. And the media caught on to it like it was like 97%. And having said that, the media attention that drew to it was, I think, something that we needed to have happen. It was just a shame that it happened in the way that it did. And I wanted to reflect on that because when REDcycle came about, I had people messaging me, tagging me in comments, what can we do? What can we do? I've been collecting our plastics. I'm stockpiling them. Anyone here stockpile plastics? I can see nodding happening. Go on. You're not alone. I can see them all. And that's really why you're here right now. So for me, it was really, really, really simple. In theory, avoid it. Yeah. Now, the reality is avoiding soft plastics in entirety is incredibly difficult, but reducing them is quite possible. And so when we talk about some of the campaigns, the strongest campaign that comes to mind is Plastic Free July. Has anyone heard of Plastic Free July? A lot of you have. For those of you who haven't, or if you've heard of it but not participated, Plastic Free July really is a grassroots organisation. It's a grassroots movement encouraging people to think about the plastics that they have in the month of July with the intention, of course, to continue those habits. And they started with the plastic straws, coffee cups, water bottles and soft plastic bags. That's the key four. They've added to it and gone on. Now, that started back in 2011 with just a handful of people in an office inspiring each other. In 2024, there were 174 million people worldwide who participated in July, which makes it the biggest waste avoidance campaign in the world. So that's a really great effort. If you haven't heard of Plastic Free July, please look them up after you leave this. But waste avoidance is only a part of it, and we can't avoid everything completely. We do need to manage what we've got. Bringing it back home, Sustainability Victoria actually does some really interesting programs and campaigns. They've got the, am I going to say it right? It's the small acts, big impacts. Thank you. Big impacts. I should know that. I say it a lot. It doesn't. Small actions. I kept saying small actions when I was thinking big. That's right. And they do that for food waste. They do that for plastic waste. They do that for recycling as well too. They've got about 80%, and correct me if I say these wrong, but I think it's about 80% of the councils that are on board supporting that, and they support them financially to have that messaging. I know that some of the councils that have brought me in to run talks for their community engagement will actually do the small acts, big impacts campaigns. That's quite effective. And then of course the education, which I spoke about before, where I actually, educate them. I go to a corporate client, or the council is actually wanting the people to do these things. And I often get questions, how can I reduce this waste? How can I do this? How can I do that? Really great questions to answer. But when I look at what has made the biggest change in terms of waste avoidance, in one word, it's legislation. We all know about the plastic bag bans. I'll call it a ban because that's what it was called, but it was banning the sale of the carry bags at supermarkets. The National Retailers Association says that we actually reduced our plastic bags by 80% because of that. That's quite a big thing. Now, if that legislation didn't come in, would that have happened? I'll say no. I think it's fair to say no. Although we did see a lot of the supermarkets, particularly the major supermarkets, promoting how environmentally sustainable they were because they actually made that shift. It was their call to do it, but the legislation was there to make it happen. So it really is interesting when it's out there. But I guess you do have to make the most of these situations. The other thing I find that when it comes to behaviour change and making things happen is there's a lot of confusion out there. Has anyone ever tried to go, okay, I've got this plastic bag, I've got this packaging, how do I dispose of it? And you're not quite sure? Well, I've got some show and tell. I'm a sustainability educator. It's what I do. And the trouble that we have with these bags here, I've got this bag here, because maybe we could do away with plastic and have compostables. Maybe. This one here is an earth-friendly compostable bag. You can reuse it for food scraps. Hang on. Don't need my glasses. Simply place in your approved council green bin or home compost, and it will break down, leaving only nutrient-rich soil. Sound good? I think it sounds good, except this is from my local area, and if you want to put a compostable bag into your FOGO bin, it must be council supplied. If it's not council supplied, then it's a contaminant. Some councils don't even accept plastic bags. So unless you put this in your home compost, it's not going to be composted. And if you put this in to be recycled, that's a contaminant too. We don't want that into the recycling. So that's one of the catches that we have. Another catch with a plastic bag, I'm not going through a whole lot of plastic bags. You are? It's going to be fixed. Okay, well, the technical people can talk. The standards. Oh, you don't mean the composting, you mean the, yes. The other thing, do you mean the standards of how they label? Is that what you mean? Great. I'm going to hand it back to the technical people then. This one here is, please reuse me, reuse, recycle, reduce. Remember to bring me every time you shop. And see that number there? What does that mean? It means it's high density polyethylene. That's all it means, right? But a lot of people would see that symbol on there and go, okay, I can recycle that. Now, what's challenging with this, and the reason this is actually a bit of a relic. Actually, I don't think you can get this bag anymore, but I wanted to point it out to you because, can you hold this? Be very careful with this because I realise this box isn't as secure as I thought. And can you see that bag? Sorry, if those on the screen you can't see it. It's basically falling. Don't touch it. It's crumbling. It's crumbling into the box. And that actually bag was given to me by something that I got given to me at the Buy Nothing group and in my wardrobe. So it wasn't in the elements. It wasn't in the sun, but in my wardrobe, it's now into tiny pieces. So if you acquire that bag, how do we manage them properly? How do we dispose of them? How do we deal with them? Often, effectively, what happens, it comes down to, it's a case of somebody makes the thing, somebody sells the thing, and then we get this bag, and it's up to us as individuals to manage that. And so when I look at this from a behaviour change perspective, how am I supposed to change behaviour when we've actually got these things that we can't recycle right? The easiest thing for me to do is to say avoid it. But of course, we can't always avoid these plastics. So we do need to look at that. And we do need to look at these companies and go, right, so you've manufactured this plastic bag, or you're selling something in that plastic bag. It doesn't matter if they manufactured it or not. If they're selling it, if they're distributing it, they're contributing to it. And getting a reform on that would be really great. We need to go back to that avoid. It's the basics. Avoid it where we can. And sometimes we don't have a choice to avoid it when we're making a purchase. I know I was looking in the fruit and veggie. I don't shop in supermarkets. I know some of you do, but I think it's going to be the same type of thing. And I saw the capsicums. I call them the traffic light capsicums. Do you know what I mean? The red, the yellow, the green. And they're packaged up in a packet, and there's often a lining in there too. I think they use cardboard now. It used to be plastic. And I thought that was interesting. It's about $6 to buy those 3 capsicums, which sounded pretty good, I suppose. It's $6 a kilo, except it was half a kilo of capsicums in there. So a lot of money's being made by packaging them up for the convenience of people who grab them. But it can work the other way as well too, in the sense that, have you tried to buy carrots? Carrots are always cheaper in a plastic bag. And I'm told that about 70% of people like to buy carrots in a plastic bag. But I'm not sure if it's because they like the plastic bag, or maybe it's because it's cheaper. So sometimes a customer gets this plastic and they don't want that plastic, but they've got to manage that. How do we work through that? It really comes down to, it's a case of, we've said it before about the extended producer responsibility. We've got that. And to hear the potential that Germany and other countries are actually putting a tariff or a tax on there, that could be a real game changer, and it could perhaps level it out when somebody wants to avoid the plastic in the first place. So we can work through all the climate and misinformation, misinformation and confusion. I'm thinking climate because I wanted to connect this to climate. Sometimes we can just look at waste as being a waste issue. To me, waste is not a waste issue. Waste is a symptom, and it's a symptom of resource consumption, and it ties into climate. So we're looking at plastics here. These plastics are petroleum-based. We're extracting a non-renewable resource to make a plastic bag that's used for a very short amount of time. Now, of course, it's not just plastic bags, it's plastic everywhere. A lot of this can tie into other things, but I'm tying it into the plastic bags. So we do need to look at that. And some of the solutions that we hear about is that it's going into a road. The plastic's being recycled, it's going into road base. Okay, so we needed a polymer to go into the road base, and that's a good thing, but how many roads? Are we building enough roads to manage all the plastics? No. Do we really want them there? Maybe it's a park bench. Is a park bench, is that the best use of the plastic? So therefore, effectively, if we do put it into one of these items here, we're just pulling in new resources. It's not really a circular system in my mind. We're pulling in new resources, using it, and it's spiralling out. I call it the spiral economy. The circular economy keeps that resource going. So if or when a plastic bag can become a plastic bag again, or better still, if it's reused, that is circular, because we're keeping it going, and that's what we need to focus on. We also need to look at plastic from the environmental perspective and microplastics. You saw, or at least they're on the bottom of the box, a whole lot of microplastics. That gets into the environment, so it's incredibly problematic. It affects biodiversity, it affects the soil. Plastics are found in the soil, they're found in the water, it's been found in our food. And so we've really got to look at the use of plastic in that way as well too. It affects climate, diversity and human health as well. Plastics have been found in testings in humans as well. So there's a lot of elements to look at. Recycling is a part of it, a really important part of it, but avoiding it is really essential. And I think one of the biggest things, and I do like to talk about extended producer responsibility, because we need to stop. Somehow we walk into a store as a customer and we buy the thing, and then it turns around and we turn into a consumer, and it's a consumer responsibility, which is really, in the sense of it, the way that the industry is passing the buck. And we need to stop passing the buck and go, yes, I can do behaviour change and we can get people to do the thing. But when people are trying to do good things and they're being limited by the jargon and the misinformation and the confusion, if we can work through that, that will make such a difference.
Thank you, Kirsty. And I think I can tell you're an educator, and it was very informative. And I hope everyone sort of enjoyed particularly the good plain language too. I think it's very, very easy to understand what you were talking about there. And also very important topic around trying to avoid plastics where we can. So I have a number of other questions, but I suspect you might have some questions too, and I'm also mindful of the time. I'm thinking we might have a few questions from the floor. We'll see how we go, and then if we need, we might pop a few of the other questions in, and we've got one very enthusiastic hand up already.
Oh no, I'm loud enough.
So perhaps when you ask your question, maybe introduce yourself. It'd be lovely to know your name, and if you're directing it to a particular panel member, that also adds.
Yeah. So my name's Kirsty, and this is for Lorna. I want to know dates for when everyone's going to get 4 bins, and I want to know how you're going to actually convince councils that are like really struggling to bring in FOGO. How are you going to get them to have 4 bins, and how are you going to get consistency, and when is it going to happen, and why hasn't it happened already? Because it should have been done ages ago. And I know it's a hard job, and I'm glad it's not my job, but like I really want it to happen like tomorrow.
I can't guarantee tomorrow. You see this white patch in my hair? that has only come since 2020. When we said we were going to have 4 bins. Look, we said when we released the policy that we wanted a glass bin in place by 2027 and FOGO in 2030. And there were a number of reasons for that delay. We knew councils had contracts that sometimes went 10, sometimes 15 years. So we had to allow for the transition of those contracts, because otherwise communities would be paying more, because industry sometimes would penalise for a variation to contract. FOGO, we delayed a little bit longer because we didn't think we had the full capacity in the sector to turn that FOGO into compost. So we wanted to make sure that we were lining up the investment in the appropriate facilities so that we could handle the FOGO coming through the system. When are the bins coming? Well, this is the question I ask my team every single day, and it's the question I ask every single council. We have, let me see if I can get the numbers right. We have about 70% of councils provide access to a FOGO service. Councils have really rushed the FOGO out faster than we thought they would. And other councils, mainly very rural, low populous councils, are taking a little bit longer because they generally don't have a garden organics bin. So it's a bit more complicated for them. Glass, we're much slower than I would like to be. We've got 23 councils who currently provide a glass out service, and we are ramping up the pressure on those councils now to get their plan in place, get their bins ordered, get the service ready to roll out. We've got a legislative framework. The requirement for the 4 bins is actually baked into the legislation. If councils do not provide 4 bins by the regulated date, and I'll come back to that, they essentially will be breaking the law, and there will be penalties for them under the Circular Economy Act. The date. So the date for the commencement of the regulations and standards and when those 4 bins become law is currently under consideration by the government. I can't preempt a decision by a minister or the government. We make recommendations, but we said in the policy, glass by 2027, FOGO by 2030. There might be some tweaks to that, but ultimately that's the decision for the minister. And how will we make councils do it? We have provided significant funding to support councils for the purchase of infrastructure and bins. We've provided extensive support. We have capability building sessions with councils on a monthly basis. I nag them incessantly on when they're going to do it. You also nag them. We stood up a new regulator, so Recycling Victoria oversees the Circular Economy Act. There are regulations that are currently under consideration that will determine how councils will provide those services, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. What happens in Melbourne can't happen in West Wimmera, just for an example. And then the standards are actually a subordinate piece of legislation that sits under the regulations. So they'll have to do it. Even though they say they don't or they won't, they'll have to do it. It's coming. Patience.
There's a lot of resistance.
There is a lot of resistance. Yeah. Because they see it as a cost on cost. And what I would say is councils aren't necessarily very commercially minded. So some of the benefits that you can get financially through your system, they can't quite get their head around. So we do a lot of work in helping them model up what that service change might mean. Councils who have moved early basically got really good deals on some of the stuff. They got an early mover benefit. Councils who are leaving it later, they're probably going to pay a little bit more. So there's some lessons in there for councils when we look back on it in 2028. We'll go, how well did you do? Maybe you should have moved when we first spoke to you. Yeah, so I hope that helps. I know it's taken ages, but...
Thanks, Lorna. Thanks, Lorna. We've got quite a few more hands popping up. Hopefully someone's been watching which order they've been popping up. Lady in the red.
So thank you. I am a big fan of the circular economy, but I'm going to ask a burning question. And by the way, my name's Frances Saparovich. I'm from the University of Melbourne. So in the very near future, the mass of plastic in the ocean is going to exceed the weight of fish in the ocean. So the reason I'm asking is, do we have a clean way of burning it?
Who would like? Is that a Chris? Are you going to have a go at that?
I guess I'll give it a go. Look, I would say that burning it in aspects is absolutely better than what we're currently doing it from an Australian perspective. Absolutely. And I think all the conversations that we have in Europe, particularly, that it is the best outcome when we can't make it circular in any form. The actual facilities that burn this material have captures that are extraordinarily good. I know that some of the main facilities in Europe, the air coming out of these facilities is cleaner than the air around in the cities. So the actual capture of all the gases and everything else are extremely good. So I wouldn't be concerned about that. It is a much better outcome than currently what we're doing in landfill or waterways or anything else. So capturing it, burning it is not the best solution, but is significantly better than where we're at today for sure.
Chris, I think we had a sort of a related question there, just around that you might maybe extend a bit further, because I think it's a very high energy way of dealing with plastic, isn't it? So maybe take that a bit further. Yeah,
I kind of mentioned before, there's a little bit of a difference between a mass burn waste to energy facility and an energy recovery facility. So mass burn waste to energy, which we don't have any in Australia at the moment. There's 2 being built in Western Australia. That is to burn significant amount of waste. It is better than landfill, produces a small amount of energy. When you're talking energy recovery, particularly for plastics, so plastics is not a friend to a mass burn waste to energy facility. It is not something they want to burn. They absolutely do not want to burn it. When you're talking an energy recovery facility, it is a fuel replacement. So you need stuff that burns really, really well. So in that aspect, burning the plastics as a replacement for a fossil fuel is a better outcome. So a mass burn waste to energy facility does not want the plastics. A refuse-derived fuel facility in some aspects will want plastics in certain streams. I hope that's covered technically enough.
Thanks, Chris.
Can I just mention that's really good as long as the materials recovered first.
Yeah, absolutely.
When that's recovered first, that's what we do. If we can't do it that way, then we go on.
And that's the important thing. Yeah. And I think that's the important thing and we see it in Europe, is that all the legislation points that it has to be, where possible, recovered first before it can go. So we're not picking up good quality material like Darren is suggesting and taking it straight to, because it is a replacement. We want to recover circularity as much first. So that's an important point to know.
Thanks, Darren.
I'll come to you, don't I? Oh, okay. Maybe cream jack in the back, and then I'm coming up to you.
my accent is going to give it away anyway. So I do come from Germany, and in fact, I'm here for the German Chamber of Commerce, where I am also not only head of Melbourne office, but also of the energy cluster. Two things I would like to imply. One, even in Germany, not all the waste is collected from every household. So there is actually communal like collection points for certain things, which kind of seems to me makes a whole lot of sense in a spacious country like Australia. And even in Victoria, I live in rural Victoria. Oh, sorry, Daniel Andrews has reclassified us as metropolitan. Anyway, the distances seem to me be too wide for sending trucks, various trucks for every color bin. And from a carbon footprint point of view, I question whether it even makes sense to cover large distances to pick up those bins, as opposed to people actively bringing their whatever it may be. In this case, for example, like we do batteries to Aldi today, people bringing their stuff to collective collection points or communal collection points, such as old clothes, like they already do. So that is an open question to the panel. I don't know who would be best placed to answer this question, because even in Germany, which is densely populated, we do that. So I wonder if it would make sense here. The other question is pertaining a bit to what Chris just said. I also think that there are so many people proposing to make so much sense out of landfill, it's going to become a commodity. So I'm actually wondering whether we are riding two horses at the same time that are going in opposite directions. So one is to separate the waste as much as possible and recycle it, whereas the more commercial and even perhaps ecological way would be to use the landfill lock, stock and barrel to make clever ways of energy with that.
Do you want to start?
I'll take the first question and leave the other one. Don't know who I'm going to hand that one to. There are mixed services in rural and regional Victoria. We recognise that it is not, and I'm not a carbon expert, but it just doesn't even make financial or commercial sense to send a truck to pick up one bin from one household and then drive 30 kilometres and pick up another bin. So we have supported those councils to put in place drop-off facilities. Most councils have chosen to do that at their existing transfer stations, where those households, nearby households, are already using that service. But there's also options for councils to be innovative in where they are putting off those drop-off facilities. It might be at the local footy club. It might be at the local library, which we know in rural communities is a meeting gathering place. So we do recognise that in some instances it's going to be better to have those drop-off facilities for the community than it is to provide them with a bin. So that's kind of, we don't want to completely change the model that exists, but we see there's probably space in some very rural communities where there might be a bit of a mixed service. So population centre, where you're picking up bins anyway, then it makes sense to give them a bin for those household items. But then there are other things. You mentioned clothing, and that's certainly, we know that textile recycling is one of our biggest challenges and also one of our biggest opportunities. How do we collect that? We look at how the CDS works. Is there opportunity through that kind of infrastructure to do the same thing? Batteries is another one. The more battery collection places we have, the better. Get it out of recycling trucks would be amazing. So we do look at those things, and we know it's not a one-size-fits-all for councils. Now, who wants the next question?
I think it's probably, just before we go to that, thanks, Lorna. I think that's really helpful to understand some of the differences that have been applied in the rural parts of Australia. It is very fascinating, though, when you look at some of the systems overseas, and I guess it's different things have been developed for different countries and different populations, and they're used to that, and that works for them. It'd be interesting to see whether it'd be a massive change for Australia to shift to a system where things are all centralised, isn't it? So it'd be a huge shift.
I think, I just wanted to comment on that Wertstoffhof in Germany, because there's actually a similar concept here. So you can find Wertstoffhof if you look close enough. And obviously, as a German, when I arrived here, I did that, and I found it, and I was more or less the only person there, because it does exist, the infrastructure, but it's not used. So I think with these kind of models, there's a big, and we are normally not fans of talking too much about behavioral change, because we don't think you should put too much of the responsibility to the citizen, to the consumer. But I think some of these models are really, there's a lot of cultural change that would be necessary to do it, because it's just so ingrained in German culture in this form that people actually use that. While here the incentives are very different, the culture is very different. You have very easy, very low cost ways to have curbside, for example, where you can solve a lot of these problems. So I think it's quite interesting to see how much behavior change is often, it looks quite simple to transfer these solutions, but when you actually want to implement them, and we work with quite a few councils in Melbourne about this, it's really just putting it out there doesn't solve it. And in a lot of cases, some of the solution actually exists and people don't know that they do exist, because so few people actually use them.
We need education, don't we?
Yeah.
Chris, did you want to have a go at the second part of that question? Thanks.
Yeah, just about the landfill piece. I guess I'll try and tie it back to the soft plastics bit as well, just a bit of an understanding. But the issue with the landfills from an Australian perspective and from my industry's perspective is they are the most profitable assets in our industry, not just by a little bit, but by a long way. The investment in a landfill, it requires a lot, don't get me wrong, but it pales in comparison to a waste-to-energy facility. So in a lot of the circumstances, it builds in risk. And a company like REMONDIS or anyone else is not going to spend $1 billion with the enormous amount of risk that currently is in there. The only way we're going to get rid of that is through a legislation piece. I think that it has to happen. It has to support it. And why I say it from a mixed plastics or a soft plastics or any type of plastic point of view is we used to live in an environment where we could bale plastics and it would cost us $500,000 to build a facility to bale plastics to send it overseas. We had to stop that now, and we have to process it onshore. We're taking our next step. That's a $3 to $5 million facility. With that, and to tie it back to Barry's comment, you need more. And all of a sudden now we're talking about a larger facility with more chemical recycling or anything else. We all of a sudden need even more volume than what we had. What we talk about a lot when we work through this sort of stuff is competition is really good. It's really great. In a lot of these aspects, competition is actually not. And from a German perspective, what they've learned really, really well is they go out and they do public-private partnerships, and they go, APR, all soft plastics in Victoria is going to go to one facility in your facility, but you've got to build the best facility that requires it, and you get the outcome. If you go out and say, look, we're going to have an open field, everyone can do whatever they want, you have 10 small plants, they don't build to scale, it doesn't do the level that it needs to. So I've tried to move it away from the landfill as a comparison to waste to energy and show from a plastics point of view, we do need legislation to put in. Sometimes competition isn't great. We do need the investment. People aren't going to invest too much if there's too much risk. So hopefully that covers off on that question in a roundabout way.
I'm not going to get technical, but the thing that actually follows on with that is that what I find is that there are 79 councils in Victoria, and it might surprise you, I actually don't like going in and talking about recycling. The reason for that is there are some things that are really standard. Aluminium is fine, PET is fine, but some councils accept one thing, some councils don't accept that one thing, right? Right? And so from an education perspective, it's really problematic. So I can see how all this different competition, when there's different things do in different ways, it's problematic for everywhere. Yeah.
That's right. Barry got a hand up. Go ahead, Barry.
Oh, okay.
I
Thanks,
can't
Liz.
see that far. That's the problem.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, I was just going to build on from what Chris is saying, and it's 100% correct. So when you've got a market that's functioning, you have the competition. When you've got a nascent market, you have to get scale. And so SPSA, that's going to be the role of this entity. So we're applying for an ACCC authorization in the very near future, because we need brands to come together to bankroll this. but without an ACCC authorisation, that's called collusion, and we all go to jail. So we have to go through the legal minefield of getting the ACCC authorisation. Then we can go to market and contract multiple providers. And as Chris said, we need some big ones, we need some small ones, but they need long term and they need certainty. So for companies like Chris's and Cleanaway, who's in the JV with Viva, they need a couple of things. They need certainty of feedstock and they need certainty of funding. So they're those regulatory pieces that government, very good to hear that they're working on those. And the other point, I was just going to circle back to the earlier question about the behavioural change. If you look at Germany, part of their success is those private-public partnerships, but it is also the community's willingness to source separate, because a lot of it's done on the street, and they do that. I compare that to Australia, where we had access to 2,000 drop-off points for soft plastics for up to 10 years, and we got to 3%. So how do we change that? We've got to rebuild the trust. We've got to get traceability into the system so the community trusts and knows where it goes. And the standardisation that Lorna talks to is a big part of that, because once you get standardisation, you can have common messaging. So a couple of key enablers there, but I think the work that's happening, especially in Victoria, is leading the country. So I just want to applaud Lorna's team for what they've done. I know it seems like a long time for some, but it's much quicker than some of the other jurisdictions. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Barry, and apologies for not noticing your hand up there. It's a bit tricky to see, but thanks for jumping in. I think we've got time for a really quick question. Otherwise, I'm going to get in trouble.
I got the mic here. My name is Xuan. So I think you may all have what an ideal world would look like for soft plastic recycling success in Australia. So the question is, what are some of the consequences designed into that ideal world in the supply chain, and by whom it's enforced? So it's enforced by whom to keep the right material in the right stream?
Barry, did you want to have a go at that one, or?
Yeah, was that a question on packaging design?
No, it's probably more
compliance.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Lorna, it's yours.
Thanks, mate. So it is an interesting question, and it is complex in Australia in that we have 3 levels of government. What we're doing in Victoria, as Barry so kindly said, is leading the way in Australia with the system that we're putting in place. To do that, we knew that compliance was really critical, right? We know that 79 local governments are going to do 79 different things, and they have done forever. So we knew that we had to put a level of compliance over that. Recycling Victoria is a new regulator that will oversee the new regulations and the service standards, and it will be up to councils to demonstrate to Recycling Victoria how they are meeting those standards. Recycling Victoria has a number of tools that they can use. I like to call them big sticks. I'd like them to be bigger sticks, but they're just little sticks at the moment. So Recycling Victoria will be able to name and shame councils who are doing the wrong thing. You're not allowed to write and tell them. They'll also be able to fine them. They'll be able to go in and support them with compliance. So there's a number of things that we can do in a legislative regulatory environment to do that. But our challenge remains in that we can only do that in Victoria. Other governments in Australia might not be ready to go there. I think we mentioned before the export bans that were brought in by the Commonwealth government, and that had a significant impact on the market. And sometimes we had some unintended consequences there. And we have to be really, really careful when we're thinking about what we're legislating, why we're legislating, what those unintended outcomes can or will be, but also what are the things we don't know, because there's a lot as government, we don't know what we don't know. Sometimes we're not very good at asking either. So we have to be very, very conscious that legislating and regulating is actually the most effective role for government to play in dealing with a market failure. Does that make sense? Does that kind of?
The packaging, the label,
Oh, that is Barry. Yeah. Yeah.
Like when that sort of behavior happens, like the consequences that we just talking about, we've been working what sort of consequences to those stakeholders in the supply chain, beyond just everyday consumer trade.
Yeah, I'll hand over to Barry if he heard. But one of the things that we have been hearing over the last few years is government should legislate it or regulate it. And I've been in government 20 years, and you know, I've even had people say to me, "You should put the landfill levy up," and like nobody's ever said that to me previously. So there is a change. I think big industry wants to do the right thing, but sometimes it's the commercial aspect. Sometimes it's a cost for them to do the right thing. But if it's legislated and government steps in, then they have to do. So, you know, you've got big companies with shareholders, and that's who companies they have to satisfy. So it's quite a complex, and this is in federal government land, it's too much for me, but it's quite a complex arrangement, and it's a very complex system. So it's like, which part do you deal with first? But Barry, did you have anything to say on producer responsibility?
Yeah, I didn't quite hear the question. So was it around producer responsibility or packaging design? I just didn't quite.
Yeah, packaging design, labeling, and who holds them to account.
It's really every part of the question is about every part of the supply chain effectively, Barry, but maybe just talk to the bits you can through your lens.
Yes, interest of time, I'll keep it brief, but on packaging design, industry needs standards. It's the whole supply chain. And if every state and every recycler is using a different standard, who do you design it to? So if you're a company, I used to run a small business up here, which MRF am I designing my packaging to? If you're a multinational and you're importing packaging even more, what do you design it to? So getting standards in place, APCO's done a great job of the labelling and getting standards in place for packaging. The next step is coming on mandatory design standards. That's fine, as long as we don't have perverse outcomes on food safety and food waste. On soft plastic specifically, industry leapt ahead on that about 3 years ago and developed global design standards for soft plastics. So that is to remove PVC, to remove PET, anything that's got oxygen or chloride in it, to make it chemical recycling ready. So there's already a big move globally on that. That's happening. Some of the perverse outcomes, though, is you do lose shelf life. So if we've got a massive meat export market here, and so they're in the substitute packaging, they lost about a third of their shelf life, which would have rendered that industry extinct. So we've got to work on some things are quick, some things are slower. Producer responsibility, as Lorna said, it's key. It works in Germany. They brought that in initially when recycling started. We have a system where you pay in rates, and we're going to transition to a system where you pay on shelf. Absolutely key. Community doesn't pay twice. So, and I think that's underway. So if there's a market failure, industry can step up, as we're doing with SBSA. It's definitely the right way forward.
Thanks, Barry. I'm just going to get everyone to hold their questions because you will be able to ask them when we're mingling. But there is just one more question from the front here. I think probably our youngest audience member today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sina, and I'm from Hunting Tower School. I found it quite fascinating to hear about what Germany was able to accomplish. But I just had one quick question on what are the biggest challenges in adopting Germany's waste management strategies in Australia?
That's a nice big question. Does everyone just want to have a quick 2 cents in that?
Yeah. I hope this doesn't get seen anywhere. I think how it works in Germany, like rules. Australians don't like rules. They don't like to be told what to do. And a lot of the feedback that comes back on me is, I don't need 4 bins. I don't want 4 bins. You can keep your 4 bins. I'll do what I want to do. I'll just put it in the red bin anyway. So Australians don't like to follow rules. So there is, I think we mentioned, there's a cultural thing. And, you know, I'm Scottish, but I've lived here for a long time, but I'm a rule follower. So I do what I'm told to do because I realise its benefit. I think Infrastructure Victoria came out and said we should have 6 bins or 8 bins, which was fantastic for me because I only wanted to put in 4, so it took a bit of the edge off. But it's hard, and I think what we'll see, a generational change, right? You're our future. We're trying to make it better, but actually I think we'll see people your age and younger actually go, no, we know what the right thing to do is, and we're going to do it. So good luck to you and your generation.
So I think we heard 2 important things, like on the one hand, a cultural difference, I think, between also the way it is legislated. Like we heard about UPCO, and there's a lot of examples where you try to avoid legislation as long as possible until you cannot anymore. And there's also, like, Germany is a federal system, but still it's not necessarily the same as here, where often legislation actually comes from the federal level and then has to be coordinated around the different states and territories, which is a very different system. I think there's also just there's a time aspect to it, which is very important, and very important also to remember that Australia started much later. So Germany is doing this for a very long time, and there's a long history, a long past dependency of where these models could develop. And also, if you want to just transfer the models, it's a very different landscape. Like we mentioned, geographical distance, a very different investor landscape. You very often don't have also industry, like there's not actually that big of an industrial footprint. So you often don't actually have supply chain partners onshore where you can actually build these models that you can build in Germany. And then you have the waste export bans that actually keep you from working with people in Asia, for example, on these models. So it's a tricky one, but I'll come back to what I said in the beginning about why research institutes are important. I think it's really a lot about education. It's about really getting this capability that we have the young generation really taking the lead in this and changing the model, because that's the only way we can do it.
Would anyone else like to have a comment?
I guess a quick one from my side. I'd say as Australians, we're generally pretty easygoing, and I think you see that with how we kind of hope for an outcome. And I think the Germans legislate for an outcome. And I think that's the really, really big difference when we talk about what we happen in Australia. We're just hoping for stuff to happen. We're hoping that industry will fix it. We're just hoping that it will happen. It doesn't work like that in so many circumstances. So legislate the outcome and you will get an outcome.
So maybe with an election coming up, we can think about who we vote for, because legislation is absolutely key. I know I've raised that before and it's not quite your answer. I know you're not quite voting yet, but I don't usually like to go down the political path, but this is a political space. When they're making decisions that affect each and every one of us, it's really important that we look at that. I'm not going to suggest who you vote for, but I do think that if we make a conscious decision about who we vote for, that can make a very big difference.
Thanks, Kirsty. And Barry, final comment from you?
Yeah, I'll probably echo what everyone's saying. I just think it's time. I grew up and I remember putting the bin out in the 70s. It was a metal trash can. And for those who watch Sesame Street, it's the one that Grover lived in. I think it's Grover. That's all we had. And we had an incinerator in the backyard. So you go to 2 bins, to 3 bins, and to 4, it's fantastic. And I think it's the next generation that will make it happen.
Thank you, Barry. And you will be able to ask some more questions one-on-one afterwards, but I'm going to call it there because the food is ready and I'll get in trouble if we don't wrap up. So I'll keep it very brief. I think I'm going to sum it up in one sentence, really. I think what we've heard is that we need multiple complementary system level changes to be happening to progress the management of soft plastics in Australia. And we've got very fine people working on it, as you've heard tonight, and I'd like to thank the panellists for the time. it was preparation time, your time giving me a bit of education about different areas you're working in so that we could come up with hopefully something that was interesting for the audience tonight. And thank you very much to the audience for your questions. I hear a lot of passion out there and commitment to great environmental outcomes, which of course I think everyone in this room is. It's just why we're here.